Everybody calls the 1998 fire a natural tragedy that took my son. The truth is, I'm the one who poured the gasoline because a $2 million insurance check was more important than his future. I'm 65 now. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Portland where the walls are thin enough to hear my neighbors cough, and the air smells like damp carpet and regret. I used to own the Skyline in Coos Bay, the Miller Lumber Mill. It had been in my family for 3 generations, a cathedral of cedar and pine that provided for half the county. But by the late 90s, the cathedral was rotting. The spotted owl, the logging bans, the cheap imports, it didn't matter what the cause was. And the effect was that I was drowning in red ink. I owed the bank $4 million. I owed the suppliers $600,000. I had a wife, Elena, who still looked at me like I was a king, and a 10-year-old son, Jamie, who thought the mill was a playground built just for him. Desperation is a slow-acting poison. It starts in the stomach and works its way up to the brain until you can't see anything but the exit sign. The exit sign for me was a thick insurance policy with a total loss clause. I spent months planning it. I studied wind patterns. I bought the accelerant in 3 different counties, 5 gallons at a time, hiding it under the floorboards of the drying shed. I wasn't a criminal. I was a businessman making a final violent liquidation. August 14th. The air was so dry the trees felt like they'd explode if you looked at them too hard. I sent Elena and Jamie to her sister's place in Eugene for the weekend. I told them I had to stay back and finish the quarterly books. I kissed Jamie on the forehead. He was holding that battered wooden train I'd carved for him when he was 5. "See you Sunday, Dad," he said. I watched their car pull out of the gravel driveway, and for a second, just 1 second, the weight of what I was about to do made me want to collapse. Then I thought about the foreclosure notice tucked in my desk drawer. I walked into the mill at midnight. The silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of saws and the scent of sawdust. I started in the back, near the chemical storage. I poured the first gallon. The glug, glug, glug of the plastic jugs sounded like a heartbeat. I moved through the main floor, creating a trail of liquid gold. $2 million. That's what that smell meant to me. It meant Claire, my 7-year-old daughter who was already with her mother, would go to college. It meant Elena wouldn't have to watch me become a ghost of a man. I reached the main office. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark silhouette of the Oregon forest. I struck the match. The flame was small, innocent. I dropped it. The whoomp of the ignition was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The heat was instantaneous, a physical wall that pushed me back toward the exit. I ran. I had an alibi. I was supposed to be at a diner 20 miles away, seen by a waitress I'd been tipping heavily for weeks. I got to my truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the mill was already a glowing orange eye in the darkness. And then I saw it. A bicycle, Jamie's red Schwinn. It was leaned against the side of the tool shed, right next to the entrance I'd just bolted shut from the outside to ensure the fire stayed contained. My heart didn't just race, it stopped. I jumped out of the truck, screaming his name. "Jamie! Jamie!" The roar of the fire answered me. The roof of the drying shed collapsed. sending a geyser of sparks into the black sky. He'd come back. He must have jumped out of the car when Elena stopped for gas, or ridden back from the bus stop. I didn't know how. I just knew he was in there. I tried to get to the door. The heat melted the hair on my arms. The smoke was a solid thing, clawing at my throat. I couldn't get in. I stood there, the owner of a $2 million bonfire, and listened to the sound of my own soul burning alive. They didn't find him until the next morning. The fire department had spent 6 hours fighting a beast I'd fed with my own hands. When the sun finally rose over the Coos Bay horizon, it didn't bring light. It just revealed the blackened skeleton of my life. The fire chief, a man I'd gone to high school with, walked up to me. His face was smeared with soot, but his eyes were what broke me. They were hollow. "Thomas," he said, his voice cracking, "we found him. He was near the north exit. It looked like the door was jammed from the outside." I didn't cry. A man who has just realized he murdered his son for a check doesn't have tears. He has a void where his heart used to be. I felt the weight of the padlock key in my pocket. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and sympathetic whispers. People touched my shoulder and spoke about God's plan and the cruelty of fate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that God had nothing to do with it. This was a man's plan, a businessman's plan. Elena was a shell. She didn't look at me during the service. She just stared at the small white casket as if she could see through the wood to the boy who loved wooden trains. But the real nightmare began 2 weeks later. His name was Arthur Vance. He was the lead investigator for the insurance company. Vance didn't wear a uniform. He wore a cheap wrinkled suit and carried a briefcase that smelled like stale tobacco. He sat in my temporary office, a trailer parked on the edge of the ash, and didn't say a word for 3 full minutes. "Mr. Miller," he finally said, tapping a pen against his teeth, "this was a very efficient fire." "Efficiency is a strange word for a tragedy," I replied. My voice was steady. I was a lawyer's son. I knew how to lie under pressure. "Oh, it's the right word," Vance said, leaning forward. "The way the accelerant was distributed, it created a perfect chimney effect. It's almost as if someone knew exactly where the structural weaknesses of the drying shed were." I felt a cold sweat prickle the back of my neck. "I've spent 30 years in that mill, Mr. Vance. I'm sure any fire would find the weaknesses I didn't have the money to fix." Vance smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Funny you mention money. We've been looking at your bank records. You were 48 hours away from a foreclosure notice on your primary residence. And the mill, you were already 3 months behind on the payroll." I didn't blink. That's why I was working late, trying to find a way out. Right, working late. At a diner 20 miles away, Vance stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ruins. "The north exit, Thomas. The one your son was found behind. The latch was found in the locked position from the outside." The silence in the trailer was suffocating. "The heat must have warped the metal," I said. "Maybe," Vance whispered. "Or maybe someone didn't want the fire to escape. Or maybe someone didn't know there was something inside they'd want to save. He left that day, but he didn't close the case. He haunted me. He showed up at the grocery store. He sat in his car outside my house at 2 a.m. He was waiting for me to crack. But it wasn't Vance who broke the silence. It was Elena. One night, a month after the funeral, I found her in Jamie's room. She was sitting on his bed holding the wooden train I'd carved, the one he'd gone back into the fire to get. "You did it, didn't you?" Her voice was flat, dead. I stood in the doorway, the shadows hiding my face. "Elena, don't be ridiculous. I lost my son. I lost my business." "You didn't lose the business, Thomas. You sold it. You sold it to the fire." She looked up at me, and the hatred in her eyes was more painful than any burn. "I found the receipts for the gasoline." "You used the business card at a station in Douglas County. Did you think I wouldn't do the books eventually?" I walked toward her, reaching out a hand, but she flinched as if I were a leper. "I did it for us," I whispered. "For Claire, for you. We were going to be on the street, Elena. I didn't know he was in there. I swear to God, I didn't know." "God isn't listening to you anymore," she said. She stood up and handed me a small, charred iron box. It was Jamie's treasure chest. He used to keep his baseball cards and lucky rocks in it. "The fireman found this under his body," she said. "I haven't opened it. I couldn't." She walked past me out of the room, and I knew she was never coming back. She moved into the guest room that night. We became ghosts haunting the same hallways. I sat on the edge of Jamie's bed, the iron box heavy in my lap. The metal was still soot-stained, smelling of the end of the world. I forced the latch open. Inside were no baseball cards, no lucky rocks. There was only a single piece of paper, folded neatly, protected from the flames by the heavy iron. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The paper was a page torn from his school notebook. The edges were slightly yellowed from the heat, but the pencil lid was still dark, still sharp. Jamie's handwriting was always messy, big, looping letters that he hadn't quite learned to tame. "Dad, I saw you with the cans today. I saw you hiding them in the floor. I know about the bank. I heard you and Mom crying last night." I stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt like it was made of lead. "If the mill burns and it's just an accident, they'll give you the money, right? But Vance said if it looks like you did it, we go to jail. I'm staying in the shed, Dad. If I'm in there, they won't think you did it. They'll think it was just a terrible mistake. Don't be sad. I'm helping the family. I love you." I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there, clutching that piece of paper while the world dissolved into a blur of gray and black. My son didn't die because he forgot a toy. My son died because he thought he was saving me. He was 10 years old, and he had more courage, more loyalty, and more love than I would ever possess in 1,000 lifetimes. He had sat in that shed, smelling the gasoline I'd poured, watching the orange glow grow under the door, and he hadn't moved. He'd stayed there to be my alibi, to be the evidence that made me look like a victim instead of a monster. I took a lighter from my pocket, the same one I'd used to light the match. I watched the corner of the notebook paper catch fire. I watched his words, his beautiful, selfless, devastating words, curl into black ash and vanish. I couldn't let Elena see it. I couldn't let Claire see it. If they knew he died for me, they wouldn't just hate me. They would be destroyed by the same poison that was currently rotting my marrow. I was the only one who could carry this. A secret burial within a secret burial. 3 months later, the insurance check arrived. $2,142,000. Vance came to the house one last time to deliver the news. He looked older, more tired. The smugness was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling suspicion that he couldn't prove. The lab couldn't find enough evidence to dispute the accidental ruling, he said, handing me the envelope. The tragedy of the boy, it clouded the investigation. No jury would believe a father would burn his own son. I took the envelope. It felt cold. "I'm sorry for your loss, Thomas," Vance said. He paused at the door, looking back at me with eyes that knew I was a liar. "I hope the money is worth what you paid for it." The money saved us. It paid off the debts. It bought a new house in a new city where no one knew the name Miller or the smell of smoke. It put Claire into the best private schools. But it didn't save my marriage. Elena and I lived like two strangers sharing a lifeboat. We didn't touch. We barely spoke. She stayed for Claire. She stayed because she was waiting for me to confess, and I was waiting for her to leave. Years bled into each other. Claire grew up. She was brilliant, sharp. She had my ambition, but she had her brother's eyes that seemed to see through every facade. She told me she wanted to be a lawyer. "I want to protect people, Dad," she said when she was 17. "I want to make sure the truth isn't something people can just buy and sell." Every time she won an award, every time she got an A, every time she smiled, I saw Jamie. I saw the boy in the shed. The money was working. The investment was paying off. My daughter was becoming a champion of justice, funded by the greatest injustice ever committed in the state of Oregon. But a past isn't a ghost. It's a debt. And interest on a debt like mine is compounded in blood. Yesterday, Claire called me. She's 35 now, a high-ranking prosecutor. "Dad," she said, her voice sounding different, professional, distant. "I'm working on a cold case file, an old arson investigation from Coos Bay, 1998. My heart didn't stop this time. It just started to die." I looked at my daughter, and for a moment I saw the ghost of the man I used to be, the one who believed he could control the narrative of his own life. I looked at the way she held her chin, the way her eyes never wavered. "He wrote that he loved me," I lied. The lie felt like a lead weight in my chest. He wrote that he went back for the train, that it was dark and he was scared, and he hoped I'd come find him. Claire's face didn't soften. She leaned over the table until her face was inches from mine. "You're lying, Dad. You're still lying. You've been lying for 28 years, and you don't even know how to stop." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small laminated scrap of paper. It was a corner of a notebook page, charred, smelling of old smoke. My heart stopped. "Vance didn't just take a photo through the window, Dad," she whispered. "He came into the house after you left the room that night. You were so busy crying over your scotch that you didn't hear him. He took the ashes out of the fireplace. He had a forensic team reconstruct what they could. She laid the scrap on the table. I could see 3 words clearly. Staying in the... He knew, Claire said, her voice a jagged edge of grief. He knew you were going to burn it down. He stayed in there to make sure the insurance paid out. He died so you could have your $2 million. I buried my face in my hands. The silence of the apartment was a roaring sound in my ears. I didn't want him to, I sobbed. I never would have. I thought he was in Eugene. But you took the money, she spat. You took the money he paid for with his skin and his lungs. You used it to buy my shoes, to pay my tutors, to build a life on top of a sacrifice you didn't even have the balls to admit to. She stood up and straightened her blazer. The professional mask was back, but her eyes were dead. I've already filed the paperwork. Thomas, the statute of limitations on arson may have passed, but insurance fraud of this magnitude, combined with the new evidence of the locked door and Vance's journal, it's enough for a grand jury. You're going to prosecute your own father? No, she said, walking toward the door. I'm going to prosecute an arsonist who murdered my brother. I don't have a father. She opened the door and paused. One more thing. About that plot twist you love so much? The irony of the innocent victim? She turned her head slightly, her profile sharp against the hallway light. Jamie didn't just stay in there to save the family. Dad, what do you mean? Mom told Vance something else, something she never told you. Claire took a deep, shuddering breath. Jamie told her that afternoon that he'd seen you in the basement of the house too, poking at the gas lines. He knew the mill was just the start. He knew you were going to burn the house down with all of us in it to get the total loss payout. The world went white. I never touched the gas lines, I whispered. It doesn't matter if you did or didn't, Claire said. He believed you were going to kill us. He went to the mill because he thought if he died there, you'd stop. He thought his life was the price he had to pay to keep me and Mom safe from you. She stepped out and closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. I sat in the dark. I am 65 years old, and I have nothing. The $2 million is gone. My daughter is coming for me with the very laws I paid for her to learn. And in the corner of my eye, in the shadows of my cheap apartment, I see a small boy. He's holding a wooden train. He's not screaming. He's just waiting for the fire to reach him. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that even now, I'm wondering if I can find a way to sue the state for the legal fees.